Okay, so Andy comes to us from the hospital, and thank you for doing this, Andy. It's all yours.
Thank you. I'm grateful to you all for letting me show my work with you and have a chance to talk to you all. Um, I will keep it a little bit brief because I'm here in the hospital and my son is about 3 hours old and a little surprising. Thank you this morning, but yeah, I'm happy to be able to still talk to you all about this artwork. So this is tracing attention. I have a really bad habit with naming where if I get into a certain project, I tend to just kind of stop giving things individual titles and then start kind of numbering things. And then I end up with like multi-year long projects and I give them like a year and then a number. And it's a total mess because people want like better titles than that usually. But Tracing Attention is a project that kind of grew out of me. Uh, I'd left myself a note and for maybe a year and a half it sat on a desk and I watched it and the note was pay attention to what you pay attention to. And I realized that attention was like this battlefield that I guess many of you and people who are not in this conversation would definitely say that they have experienced the battle for having control over their own attention. And this is especially important to me because my wife is from another country. She's from another part of the world, and from time to time we live apart so that she can visit her family for an extended period of time and my vacations don't get to be quite so long as hers do sometimes. And so there have been big chunks of time where I was separated, uh, and had to do sort of my family interaction through a phone screen. And there was such a wonder to that, this idea that a little phone device can sort of connect you to a little kid. And it's so amazing that, to get the attention of a 1-year-old. This is my daughter many years ago. And ooh, my son is waking up. Um, so so the idea is that there's this wonderful piece of technology, this wonderful interface that gives us access to these really special things, this kind of connection that we wouldn't otherwise have. But it's also a uh oh my goodness, there are phones going off, there are babies crying. Um, can you answer this phone? All right. My goodness. All right. Um, where was I? So
You were talking about
yeah,
buying attention
yeah, yeah.
for
I
extended time.
might. Yeah. I'm gonna hide in the bathroom. All right. Um, all right. And once I get through this, I can say I've done everything. So yeah. So yes. Um, so this sort of a wonderful interface, but it's also full of things that want to kind of, bargain away or chip away at my ability to pay attention to the things that are important to me. So I think the phone is, it's a tool. It can be good, it can be bad, but I think I really wanted to pay attention to the ways that there can be some destructive forces kind of interwoven into that experience. And so I built up because I was so interested in kind of, capturing these little moments. I was taking tons and tons of screenshots and pictures of these little video chats from long distance. And this is my daughter. She's much older at this time and this stage. I thought it was really interesting. She's using like this video format for like doing like experimental photography. Like she's like, turning off the lights and like playing with light effects and, in a way she's like doing composition herself and just really natural for a little kid to explore that way. But I thought that was pretty neat as well. But my interest was in trying to visualize the way that the uh, that attention is a measure of value, and that there are these forces that want to sort of pull it apart or augment it or destroy it in various ways. And so I had sort of parallel to this journey been getting a little bit more into coding, trying to understand like some basic on a really basic level languages like JavaScript and Python. And so Python is kind of interesting because once you kind of crack into this, you realize like, oh, this is like an Illustrator file or an SVG file. It's like got an order to it, and it sort of looks like it's a group with a line with subpaths and segments. And you realize if you input something that you can start to manipulate it. And if you can manipulate it, maybe you can think of creative ways. Sky's the limit, the same way that we play with everything else in the world as visual artists. We can manipulate this data, and how can you come up with an algorithm to destructively manipulate data? How can you come up with an algorithm that disintegrates an image, that pulls it apart, that creates, distortion fields? And so this became really, really interesting to me because I felt like I was able to sort of dig into the kind of distortion effects and maybe create a system, like creating systems that kind of do the thing for me. And that's really attractive to me as an artist. And then on top of that, I felt like there was an interesting connection because there's a way that the the measurement of attention is sometimes not a human thing. Like I've got a subjective human way of experiencing and sort of noting what I pay attention to, and then a machine interface, like an algorithm that's sort of tracking how long I stay on a certain page if I'm like on a social media interface, that's going to tailor my algorithm to give me like more cat videos and less art or something like that. Like there's a machine type of vision, and I was really intrigued by this idea that the machine vision can have a different sensibility that can be flawed, that can be skewed, that can be like kind of alien to like our human sensibility of how to pay attention. And so these are examples of me going into source images from my archive and manipulating them and pulling them apart through these little algorithmic processes. And so I won't get into all the coding and stuff. It's a lot of fun. I'm using some Python libraries such as VPipe and VSketch, and some sort of some additional custom little written things that help to kind of pull things apart and organize pathways, and some like sorting algorithms that like pull fragments from multiple files and output them to new documents. So this is a way to kind of introduce a little bit of that sense of being out of control as well, because there are things about this that are very much not in my own control, and that kind of forces me to go back in and do what I do as a person when this happens, and try to piece back together my experiences as like a coherent thing, as a coherent human experience. This is an example of some different stages of algorithmic manipulation of an original drawing, and then there are these different degrees of manipulation and different uh, sort of styles to the algorithmic expression. That sort of sounds way too fancy for the thing that it actually is. It's just like a set of instructions. It says do this, then do this, then do this, and a bunch of little um, uh, you know, what do you say, expressions for each of the parts of the image. So it's just manipulation of data. And this is stuff that we do manually all the time. It's just through a different interface. So I felt like if I'm sort of halfway in on this like computer aided image design or computer aided composition, maybe I could go a bit deeper. And I'd also gotten some flatbed pen plotters that are basically drawing tools that operate and like use a pen to kind of follow a set of pathways on an image. And these are really old school. This is like the very first, digital printer is a pen plotter that would just sort of draw out all these little pathways that are described by math. And what I felt like was these tools can turn into something really cool for the printmaking studio, which is where I teach. And so I was using dry point plates, basically PETG plastic, thin sheet plastic. And over here on the right, you see this is a an industrial diamond engraver. It's kind of covered in dust, but let's see if we can get this. So this guy is this plotter is drawing in this file that's been output by an algorithm, and it goes through some really interesting thinking about like how it does that. But um, let's see if I can move on. Yeah, and so here's an example workflow where I kind of have an image. It goes through the drawing process and it's expressed as a plate. I also experimented with other uses of the tool. I'm trying to see how much mileage I can get out of this thing because it's a teaching tool, and I want to see how many different applications it can have in the classroom. So over here, I've actually got for copper etching. This is stop out. Basically an acrylic based stop out in a brush pen, and so it's drawing a resist layer onto the copper so that I can etch it a little bit more for the next step etch, and then draw a little bit more resist, and then etch it a little bit more for the next step. And so I collaborated in this one because I'm drawing a bit by hand, and then I have the machine do a little bit, and seeing how I can kind of have those parts of the process come together. And additionally, I have been experimenting with creating additional tools for the machine. It sounds really interesting. Those little servos are really wild. They sound very melodic, creating weird harmonies. But the it doesn't come naturally with a cutting tool. I had to design and 3D print a little cutting adapter for a vinyl cutter so that it could latch onto this machine so that it can drive around and create paper cuts. And from there, I'm able to take thin paper prints that I've made, screen prints on things like masa paper or really fine Japanese paper, and have those cut up. And these elements are being used for chinkale, which um, is a process. I'll kind of talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then also for screen printing, things like screen printing, having it sort of dip a brush and do some drawing, and also trying to test the limits of the process and saying like, can it really give me something as lively as a person can express? I think the answer is sort of no, but then it gives you something else. Like I think there's more sort of curiosity in the process for me. So I describe my process of composition from this stage on as one of kind of reassembling sense out of the nonsense, out of having all of this information kind of pulled apart into what feels like confetti, trying to reassemble it into something that is comprehensible or starts to feel like it has a bit of the spirit of that original material. And so I'm mixing and matching different processes. I'm playing with screen printing with those dry point plates, and those acrylic plates are in dry point. It's an intaglio printing process, and if you've never done intaglio, it's kind of the opposite of relief, where leaf, you kind of carve away everything that is not your image, and then you ink that up and print it. But with intaglio, you make this scratch on the surface of a material, and ink will stick to that scratch in the shape of that drawing that you've just made. And so the machine is creating these scratches, I'm creating these scratches, and creating these these layered materials, layered drawing elements. And a cool thing that you get to do is layer up other sort of collage style elements to simultaneously print and glue different visual elements at the same time. So this is me kind of staging up a plate for that. And these are some working shots where I've actually pulled the print over the drum of the press, and you kind of see I've pulled this image from this plate on the left, and I've now positioned a new plate on the right and kind of staged it up with a bit of Chinkale. And you can see how those shapes kind of lay into the print and merge with that original carrier sheet of paper and then get printed on simultaneously, and it all kind of becomes the same object at that point. And so this is also important to me because I'm a printmaker and I'm traditionally trained and I work in a studio where we go through traditional, we're educated in traditional processes. And so it was important to me to, connect with those roots as well because I feel like there is beyond just attention and sort of passively paying attention. I feel like activities like handcrafts. You all just came out of a ceramic studio. Like when you're creating an object, you pay attention to it. Like there's a way that you show like connect to it and have a deeper connection with it because you are hand building something or on a wheel throwing an object and throwing a cup or a bowl or something. And so the same thing is true when you're doing these like very demanding manual printing processes like intaglio printing where it demands that you're really sort of in the material and it attunes you to it in a specific way. So I feel like that rolls into that idea of valuing attention. So so yeah, these are some more sort of process photos of some similar work. These are roughly chronological. I realize I didn't give you like a finished work shot for a while, so we talked a lot about process. We can kind of see some of the things. So this is a culmination of a lot of things going on. There's diffuse pressure printing, there's monotype, Chinkale, there's some laser cutting for some of the paper elements, as well as the CNC dry point elements. And this might sort of seem like I'm like really deep into all of this like digital abstraction. This is not really truly my style historically. I started off originally as being, a lot more interested in naturalistic drawing, representation, traditional printmaking, lithography, things that don't really scream that they're, going to be out here connected to all of this, tinkering with code and machines. But I think that's what intrigues me so much about it. I'm trying to get to the bottom of whether I think that maybe in the background of my mind, I'm kind of asking the question, do I think that there's a way that, some of this push for like technology to take over the creative field is that really a viable thing? I'm always going to say no, but I kind of want to justify that to myself. I want to say, truly kind of get to the bottom of it and say like, no, there's a soul in the work that a person makes, and there's a lot less soul in the work that a machine produces. But it's a little bit of um, you know, I'm not necessarily making a clear case one way or the other because here I am like meddling in it, like muddying the waters, kind of going both ways where like sometimes I let the machine thing do its thing, and then sometimes I'm interfacing with it and I have my hands all over the place. And so these are kind of earlier works where I'm like playing with like single effects and fewer layers. And later on I'm working with a little bit more complexity. Um, and you can start to pick apart little elements where like they're fragments of like this user interface that becomes familiar to us if we, for anyone who uses a smartphone. Um, and I'm just giving you all a little bit more of a close up. There's such intricacy to the line work, that these little passages, these little fragmentary elements of Chinkale with the color change kind of bring a detail out that otherwise would sort of stay lost or kind of caught up in a storm. I like the way that it's sort of defies recognizability for the most part, and then you find a little passage that kind of draws you back in. And I also started to find that this process was loosening me up rather than having like a strict adherence to a process where like the print has to follow these rules or the artwork has to follow these rules. I encourage anyone whoever tinkers with sort of a new thing or opens up a new line of inquiry in their creative process, to find ways that can encourage you to break the boundaries that maybe you assumed you had to follow. And so being able to iterate, kind of play with variation, to play with placement, to sort of, defy the expectation that like if I'm gonna add additional image elements, like they all have to sort of adhere to this rule about a picture plane, to just kind of break apart from that. And also, in terms of experimentation, I really like to tell people, if you're going to experiment, then just stay open. If you're going to go through a process where you don't really know what's going to happen, um, like be willing to accept that sometimes a thing happens that's out of your control. Maybe it's a success, maybe it's a failure. But in some ways, these are good examples of this because this was supposed to be just fodder for cutting up into these little compositional accessories for the more complex printed works. And they started to become sort of a thing on their own. They started to become work that I felt like was interesting enough to kind of say what I wanted it to say. And that it took some coaxing to sort of accept that I didn't have to do like 10 more steps to this to sort of call it a thing. And I'm finding myself like treading in like maybe familiar territory sometimes where I go like, oh wow, like I'm suddenly like getting Rauschenberg from this thing, or I'm like, I'm connecting to like some old school thing that informed me when I was a student. So in a way, coming back around full circle in certain ways is actually kind of a treat. And I'm very appreciative of the freedom of this project because it allows me to, instead of trying to compose like a single image and make a perfect edition of, however many couple dozen prints and make them all exactly the same, it allows me to, you know, not be so precious, to make a move, see if it works. If it doesn't, that's fine. Just make another one and continuously try more things. I'm finding that that's giving a lot back to me as an artist. Yeah. So I think that's about as far as I really thought we would make it today. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. I realize I kind of rambled through a little bit of a story about my process, but if y'all have any thoughts or want a little bit more depth in any of these things, I'd be happy to offer it.
Your pieces are beautiful. They're
Thank
very relaxing to look at, even though there's so much confusion in them. Really good. Guys,
It
any questions?
reminds me a little bit of like print with a little bit of like scrapbooking. Some of them like look a little scrapbook and print kind of together.
That's probably the machine collate. piece of it.
Yeah.
Any of the printmaking students that are online have any questions?
Not really any questions, but I'm glad that you showed your process because I was really confused as to how you got all these fine lines on there. And then when you mentioned the part, the machine you were using or whatever it was, that was really like fascinating, at least to me. And I also am glad you mentioned um, that you don't really have to worry so much because of your process or uh, and that you weren't afraid to like make these mistakes because I feel like a lot of people who are in the art world, they're so afraid to make these mistakes, but it's how you learn and it's you just getting your stuff out there like is enough. It doesn't need to be picture perfect like you were saying. And I appreciated you just mentioning all that.
Oh, thank you.
I guess we should let you get back to your baby, your son. So thank you very, very much. And I'm glad we're able to make this happen. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
You
Yep.
too.
Thank you.